The attorney stopped reading. The room went completely silent, and across that polished conference table, three people who had just inherited millions of dollars began to smile. They had won. They were sure of it. On the other side of that table, a woman received one thing, a brown envelope. Inside that envelope, a single rusty iron key and a handwritten address for a property in a small Massachusetts town she had never once heard her husband mention. Not once. In 40 years of marriage. Her name was Eleanor Voss. She was 67 years old. She had no job, no savings account in her own name, no family left to call, and according to her husband's will, she had 30 days to leave the house, where she had lived for 4 decades. What those three people celebrating across that conference table did not know, what they could never have imagined, was that Eleanor Voss had spent the last 6 months of her husband's life doing something none of them thought her capable of, watching, listening, and quietly writing down everything she saw, every strange conversation, every unexpected visitor, every suspicious moment. She noticed things, and she remembered them. That rusty iron key did not open a forgotten house in the middle of nowhere. It opened something far more dangerous, a hidden study, and inside that study, 40 years of secrets. Secrets powerful enough to make three wealthy, confident people understand, far too late, that the quietest woman in the room is almost always the one paying the closest attention, and sometimes one of the most dangerous.
When I first reviewed what Eleanor brought me, I sat with it for a very long time before I said anything. In 30 years of practice, I had never seen documentation that thorough, assembled by someone with no legal training whatsoever. She hadn't just protected herself, she had built an entire case without knowing that was what she was doing.
My name is Tessa Hayes, and this is the Whispered Tales. This is the story of Eleanor Voss, a woman who was given a rusty key and told it was nothing. She opened it anyway. And what came out of that room changed every single life connected to hers. Eleanor Ann Voss was born Eleanor Ann Marsh in 1957 in Lowell, Massachusetts, the daughter of a textile mill supervisor and a woman who taught piano lessons out of their living room to supplement the family income. She was the first in her family issue to attend college, UMass Amherst, class of 1979, degree in English literature with a minor in history. She was not the top of her class. She was something more useful than that. She was the most organized person anyone who knew her had ever met. The people closest to Eleanor used to joke that she had a filing system for her filing system. And honestly, they were not exaggerating. She noticed things, small things, the kind of details most people forgot moments later. Dates, patterns, changes in behavior, things said too quickly, things people hoped no one noticed. Eleanor noticed. She always noticed.
Eleanor had a filing system for her filing system. I used to tease her about it. I said, Eleanor, you are going to either run a corporation or solve a murder. She laughed every time. Neither of us knew how right I was going to be.
She met Howard Voss at 24. He was 38, a corporate attorney at one of Boston's oldest firms, Voss, Hartley and Pierce, a firm his grandfather had founded and his father had transformed into one of the most respected legal practices in New England. Howard was not a warm man. He was precise, contained, and formidably intelligent. But when he looked at Eleanor Marsh across a dinner party in Cambridge, he saw something he had not seen in anyone else. Genuine calm, not performed composure, not calculated serenity, real bone-deep steadiness. He proposed 8 months later.
You're not trying to impress anyone in this room.
Should I be?
Every other person here is. It's exhausting to watch.
I find it more interesting to watch than to perform.
What do you see when you watch?
She said yes to his proposal. She said yes knowing that Howard came with complications, a previous marriage that had ended badly, 2 stepchildren from that marriage who already resented anyone their father showed interest in, and a professional world that would always demand more of his attention than she would. She said yes because she believed in the work of a marriage, the daily, unglamorous, consistent work of building something solid with another person. For 40 years, Eleanor Voss worked. She managed the Concord House, a historic colonial that Howard had inherited from his parents, with the same organizational precision she brought to everything. She entertained clients, supported his career, maintained the social calendar his professional reputation depended on. She raised two stepchildren who never accepted her. Daniel, who was 12 when she married Howard and never forgave her for it, and Christine, who was 9 and took her cues from her older brother. She did all of this without complaint, without demand, and with the quiet, steady attention to detail that would ultimately become her most powerful weapon. What nobody understood about Eleanor Voss, what her stepchildren never bothered to learn in 40 years of dismissing her, was that she had been paying attention to everything from the very first day. Not with suspicion, not with calculation. Simply because that was how Eleanor Marsh had always moved through the world. She noticed things, she wrote them down, and she never threw anything away. Daniel Voss was 52 at the time of these events. He had his father's precision and his mother's bitterness about everything that had come after. He worked in commercial real estate in Boston, successfully, though never quite as successfully as Howard had hoped. He drove expensive cars, wore expensive suits, attended the right clubs, cultivated the right connections, and he had hated Eleanor Marsh Voss from the moment he realized she was not temporary.
Daniel never once called her by her name in 40 years. To his face, he called her nothing. He just spoke to her directly without any form of address. Behind her back, we all knew what he called her, the secretary. Because Howard had met Eleanor at a fundraiser for his firm's foundation, made her staff. It was deliberate, it was calculated. And Eleanor never, not once, let him see it land.
Christine Voss Hartley was 49, polished, perfectly composed, the kind of woman who had spent her entire life learning exactly how to appear flawless. Her hair was always right. Her clothes were always right. Her smile arrived exactly when it was supposed to and disappeared the moment it was no longer required. She had her father's intelligence and none of his ethics.
She's arranged the silver again. Mother's silver.
Let it go.
It's not her silver to arrange. It was never her silver. Heppel needs to laid with facing the guest, Christine. It photographs better. The cranberry sauce, the Heppel pattern needs to be laid with the monogram facing the guest, Christine. It photographs better. Your father's colleagues will be here, and I know you'll want everything to look its best. The cranberry sauce is on the sideboard whenever you're ready.
That was Eleanor Voss. Not a scene, not a confrontation, not a single visible wound. Just the quiet, devastating competence of a woman who had learned that the most effective response to cruelty was to be irreplaceable. For 40 years, she was irreplaceable. And for 40 years, Daniel and Christine waited for their father to finally acknowledge what they had always believed, that Eleanor was temporary, that she was staff, that eventually she would be discarded. They were patient. They were wrong, but not in the way any of them expected. Howard Voss was a complicated man. Eleanor had never doubted that he loved her, even in the hardest years. But he loved her the way men of his generation often loved, privately, quietly, insufficiently expressed, and too often overruled by obligation, by reputation, by the exhausting burden of managing resentment inside a family that never truly healed. Howard had one significant secret. He had been keeping it for 15 years. And during the final 18 months of his life, as his heart began its slow, documented failure, he made a decision about that secret, a decision that would alter every single life connected to his. What Eleanor did not know was that Howard had been watching her watch everyone else for 40 years, and he had drawn his own conclusions. He was not a brave man in life, but in the end, he proved to be a very clever one in death. Howard Voss was diagnosed with congestive heart failure in the spring of his 81st year. The cardiologist was direct. The condition was serious. The timeline was uncertain, but the trajectory was not. Howard had, at the outside, 18 months of functional living. Less if he did not manage his stress carefully. Howard told Eleanor the night they came home from the diagnosis. They sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea, and he told her, in his precise, unemotional way, exactly what the doctor had said. Then he said something she had not expected.
I need you to do something for me. And I need you to do it without asking me why.
All right.
Starting tomorrow, I want you to write down everything you observe in this house about my affair.
Asking. I know it's strange. Eleanor, trust me one more time.
Howard.
I know what I'm asking. I know it's strange, Eleanor. Trust me one more time.
I've always trusted you.
I know. I'm sorry it took me until now to deserve it.
All right.
This house, about my conversations you hear, about anything that...
Eleanor Voss went to the study the following morning and purchased a spiral notebook from a box of office supplies she kept in the cabinet above the printer.
Over the next 6 months, Eleanor documented everything. She documented the phone calls that Daniel and Christine began making to Howard with increasing frequency. Calls they did not know she could hear from the kitchen, calls about the estate, about the house, about specific accounts, about the will. She documented the visit from Howard's longtime estate attorney, a man named Garrett Walsh, who arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while Eleanor was supposedly at her garden club meeting. She had come home 40 minutes early due to a headache. She sat in her car in the driveway and watched Garrett Walsh's car for 22 minutes before she drove away. She noted the date, the time, the duration. She documented the afternoon she found Daniel in Howard's study, uninvited, without Eleanor's knowledge, going through the filing cabinet on the left side of the desk. Daniel had not heard her come in. She watched him for 45 seconds before she made a sound. Long enough. She noted what drawer, what section, what folder color.
Eleanor produced was not a diary. It was not emotional writing. It was a contemporaneous log, timed, factually specific, and...
When I read it, I told her, Eleanor, this is exactly what a trained investigator would have produced. She said, I just wrote down what I saw. I said, yes, that is exactly what a trained investigator does.
She dated the first page, and she began. She documented the afternoon 6 weeks before Howard died, when Christine arrived with a notary public, unannounced, uninvited, and spent 40 minutes in Howard's study with the door closed. Eleanor made tea. She noted the notary's car. She photographed it from the kitchen window with her phone. She noted the license plate, the make, the model, the time of arrival and the time of departure. She said nothing. She wrote everything. And on the morning that Howard did not wake up, the Tuesday in November when she brought his coffee and found him gone, she did 2 things before she called anyone. She went to their bedroom closet. She retrieved the spiral notebook from underneath a cedar-lined hat box on the top shelf where she had kept it for 6 months. She put it in her handbag, and then she called for the ambulance. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. Eleanor dressed carefully that morning. A gray wool dress, pearl earrings that had been her mother's, low-heeled shoes she could walk steadily in. She drove herself downtown. She parked in the garage beneath the building. She rode the elevator to the 14th floor. She was 11 minutes early. Daniel and Christine arrived together 7 minutes later with their respective attorneys. 2 men Eleanor had never met who carried briefcases and did not make eye contact with her. They arranged themselves across the table from her like a negotiating team. Garrett Walsh, Howard's estate attorney, opened with the standard legal formalities. Then he began reading. Eleanor felt the room settle around her. 11.4 million, 40 years. She had never asked about their finances. Howard had managed everything, graciously, completely, with the particular confidence of a man who believed financial management was his domain and his alone. She had trusted him the way she trusted everything, completely and without condition.
The estate of Howard William Voss at approximately $11.4 million invest in court assessed it, and various additional... This includes the primary residence in Cord, currently assessed at $2.8 million, investment in portfolios totaling approximately $7.9.
The primary residence in Concord, including all furnishings and property contents, is bequeathed in its entirety to Howard's children from his first marriage, Daniel Howard Voss and Christine Ann Voss Hartley, to be divided or liquidated as they determine appropriate.
Christine's hand found Daniel's under the table. Eleanor watched it happen. She noted it.
Investment accounts totaling $6.1 million are similarly bequeathed equally to Daniel and Christine Voss. Retirement accounts valued at $1.8 million, the same distribution.
Garrett Walsh paused. He set the document down. He looked at Eleanor directly for the first time since the reading had begun.
Mrs. Voss, Howard asked me to read the BS to you verbatim. I want you to know that I argued against the language. He insisted.
Please go ahead, Garrett.
That's consistent with what we projected.
My wife, Eleanor Ann Voss, has had the full benefit of my financial provision, my social position, and my household for 40 years. This constitutes adequate compensation for her companionship and domestic contribution to our marriage. I leave to Eleanor Ann Voss the following sole bequest. One property located at 14 Heron Mill Road in the town of Ashfield, Massachusetts, along with all contents therein contained. Eleanor is asked to vacate the Concord residence within 30 days of my death, as the property is required by my rightful heirs.
The silence lasted 4 seconds. Christine broke it.
Ashfield? That's where that falling down farmhouse is. He mentioned it once, said he inherited it from a client and never got around to dealing with it.
Property taxes on a derelict building in western Massachusetts. She's welcome to it.
Garrett slid a brown envelope across the table. His hand, Eleanor noticed, was not entirely steady. Inside the envelope, a deed in her name, a handwritten note from Howard on his firm's letterhead, and a rusty iron key that looked like something from a previous century. The note said 4 sentences. 14 Heron Mill Road, Ashfield. Go as soon as you can, Eleanor. You will understand when you arrive. I am sorry I was not braver. All my love, Howard.
She called me from the parking garage. I could tell immediately something had happened, not because she was crying. Eleanor doesn't cry in parking garages. Because she was completely silent for a long time before she spoke. And then she said, Pat, I think Howard just did something. I don't know what it is yet. But I think he did something. Her voice was not afraid. It was curious. Even then, even in that parking garage, she was already paying attention.
The 30 days that followed were among the most deliberately cruel Eleanor Voss had ever experienced. Daniel and Christine arrived at the Concord house 3 days after the will reading with a real estate agent, 2 contractors, and an interior designer. They did not knock. Daniel had a key. Howard had given him 1 year ago for emergencies. He had decided this qualified. Eleanor was in the kitchen drinking her morning coffee when the 4 of them walked through the front door and began moving through her home with tape measures and clipboards and the comfortable authority of people who believe ownership is already theirs.
The kitchen is dated, but the bones are exceptional. A full renovation, we're looking at potentially 3.2, 3.4 in this market. Whatever it takes to maximize a return. We'll need the kitchen cleared by the end of the month, obviously.
I'm aware of the timeline, Daniel.
We're not trying to make this difficult, Eleanor.
I know.
She let them move through the house. She watched everything. She noted the conversations she could hear from the kitchen. The agent discussing staging strategies, Christine deciding which of Eleanor's garden plantings were worth preserving for curb appeal, Daniel on the phone with someone discussing the liquidation of specific furniture pieces. Her furniture, pieces she had chosen, maintained, polished. She wrote it all down. On the evening of day 18, Christine came alone. She walked into the living room where Eleanor was reading and sat down without being invited to.
I wanted to speak to you without Daniel. Woman to woman.
All right.
I know this has been difficult. The will, the transition. I want you to know there's no animosity on my part. This is simply Father wanted things.
I understand, Christine.
We could make this easier. If you'd be willing to sign a document confirming that you have no further claims against the estate, no future challenges, we'd be willing to give you an additional $30,000 from the estate accounts, just to help with the transition.
How long have you known your father?
All my life, obviously.
Then you know that your father drafted that offer, not you.
And you know that I would never sign something without having it reviewed. Thank you for the tea offer. I'm fine with what I have.
Suit yourself. The offer expires at the end of the month.
She added the conversation to the notebook. Date, time, Christine's exact words, her own exact words, duration of visit. And then she made a phone call, not to Patricia, not to anyone in her social circle, but to a woman named Ruth Callahan, a real estate attorney in Springfield, Massachusetts, who had been Patricia's college roommate and whom Eleanor had met exactly once at a dinner party 12 years ago. She had kept Ruth Callahan's card in a file. Under C, Eleanor drove to Ashfield on day 24. She had 6 days left on the clock. She drove alone. She had not told Patricia, had not told anyone. She wanted to see it without the interference of anyone else's reaction shaping her own. The GPS directed her off the main road onto a lane called Heron Mill Road, a narrow, unpaved track that wound through stands of old-growth hemlock and maple for approximately a mile and a half before announcing her arrival. Eleanor parked. She sat for a moment. Then she got out of the car and looked. It was not what Christine had described. It was not a derelict building. It was old, very old, built from gray Massachusetts fieldstone that dated easily to the 1780s or 1790s. The grounds had been left to grow wild, but the structure itself was solid and clearly maintained. The roof was intact. The windows were whole. The porch was clean. There was a light on inside. Eleanor stood very still for a moment. Then she walked to the front door and used the rusty iron key. It turned as smoothly as if it had been used yesterday. Inside, she found a house that was not abandoned. It was inhabited, or had been, regularly, recently, and with great care. The furniture was simple but beautiful. American antiques, the real kind, not reproductions. A Windsor chair by the fireplace, a harvest table in the kitchen, hooked rugs on the floors in muted, beautiful colors, and on every available surface, photographs. Photographs of Eleanor.
Our garden in Concord from, I think, 1987 or 1988. I was kneeling in the soil with both hands in the earth, and I was laughing at something. I don't know what. I was completely unaware I was being photographed. And I thought, he drove 2 hours west to this house, and he brought that photograph, and he put it on a shelf where he would see it every time he sat in that room. And I had never once known this place existed.
The photographs covered the walls of the main room, the stairwell, the study on the ground floor. Eleanor at different ages. Eleanor in different seasons. Eleanor unaware she was being captured. At the garden, reading in a chair, laughing at something off camera, asleep on what she now recognized as the porch of this very house. She had been here before. She had not known it. On the desk in the study, a small room lined floor to ceiling with filing cabinets, meticulously labeled, was an envelope. Cream-colored, heavy stock, sealed with wax. For Eleanor. Open when you are ready. She was not ready. She made herself ready anyway. The letter inside was 7 pages, written in Howard's precise hand, and it began, "My darling Eleanor, if you are reading this, you found the key and you drove west, and you opened this door alone, because that is who you are. I want to tell you what this house is. I want to tell you what is in this study, and I want to tell you what I spent 40 years being too frightened to say out loud." She read it standing at the desk. She did not sit down until page 4. Howard Voss had been a corporate attorney for 52 years. He had handled the financial affairs of some of the most prominent families in New England. He had negotiated deals that shaped industries. He had drafted documents that moved fortunes across generations. And for the last 15 years of his life, quietly, methodically, and entirely without Eleanor's knowledge, he had been using those skills on her behalf. The first filing cabinet contained the property documentation, the deed to 14 Heron Mill Road, transferred to Eleanor's sole name in 2008, 15 years ago. Established as a gift from Howard to Eleanor, completely independent of their marriage estate, with documentation signed by 3 independent witnesses and filed with the Hampshire County Registry of Deeds. Legally untouchable, irrevocably Eleanor's. The property sat on 180 acres of western Massachusetts woodland. A conservation group had submitted a preliminary purchase offer in 2021. Howard had kept the correspondence. For $2.4 million for the land alone. The house, assessed as a historic structure, had been independently valued at $640,000. The property that Daniel had dismissed as a derelict farmhouse worth $50,000 at most was valued at just over $3 million. The second filing cabinet contained financial documentation that required Eleanor to sit down and read slowly. Howard had, over the course of the preceding decade, established a trust in Eleanor's name, funded separately from his estate accounts, drawing on income from a private investment portfolio his children had never known existed. The trust contained $1.2 million, managed by an independent fiduciary firm in Springfield. Generating income, already Eleanor's, already beyond the reach of any estate challenge.
When Eleanor came to see me the first time, she put the letter and the property documents on my desk, and I read them carefully, and then I said, "Eleanor, do you understand what your husband did?" She said, "I think so." I said, "Your husband spent 15 years building you a fortress. He hid it in plain sight." And
the third filing cabinet, 3 folders, one labeled Daniel Howard Voss, one labeled Christine Ann Voss Hartley, one labeled Howard William Voss. Personal. Eleanor opened the third folder first. What she found was the thing she had not known she was missing. The explanation for 40 years of distance, of separateness, of a husband who loved her in private and failed her in public. Howard's personal folder contained a letter, not to Eleanor but to himself, written in 2009. A reckoning he had put on paper and then filed away instead of delivering. The children will never accept her. I have known this since the beginning. I have told myself they would soften, would mature, would eventually see what I see. They have not, they will not. My failure is that I have prioritized their approval over her dignity for 26 years, and I cannot undo that history. What I can do is ensure that they cannot touch what I leave her. What I can do is make sure that the woman who has given me 40 years of her life understands, after I am gone, if not before, that I saw her. I have always seen her. I have always known exactly what she was worth. Eleanor read that letter 4 times. Then she opened the folder labeled Daniel, then Christine. What those folders contained: documents Howard had accumulated over decades of legal practice, records of financial arrangements and personal dealings that both of his children would strongly prefer remain private. Eleanor read with the focused attention of a woman who has just been handed the complete terms of a negotiation. She closed the folders. She placed them back in the cabinet. She locked the cabinet with a small key she found in the top drawer of the desk, and she called Ruth Callahan. Daniel and Christine arrived at Heron Mill Road on a Wednesday afternoon in December. Eleanor had known they would come. Ruth Callahan had informed her that Daniel's attorneys had begun making inquiries about the Ashfield property, its assessed value, its acreage, its legal title history. When they discovered that the deed had been in Eleanor's name since 2008, they had gone very quiet for 48 hours. Then they had called their attorneys. Then they had driven west. Eleanor watched their car from an upstairs window. She watched Daniel get out and look at the property, at the stone house, the old trees, the scale of the land. And she watched the expression on his face change as he began to understand the scope of what his father had given her. She came downstairs. She opened the front door before they knocked.
Daniel, Kristen, come in. I'll make tea.
This is quite a property.
Yes, sit wherever you're comfortable. This must have been quite a surprise, finding all this. Was it a surprise to you that it existed?
This must have been quite a surprise, finding all this. We knew Father had a property out here. We didn't know the extent of it.
No, I imagine you didn't. How can I help you both?
Eleanor, we've done some research. The property, the acreage, it's considerably more valuable than anything mentioned in the will. Our position is that Father may not have fully understood the value when he made his bequest, and that as his primary heirs we have standing to.
Daniel, the deed has been in my sole name since September of 2008. It was transferred as a gift, documented by 3 witnesses, and filed with the county registry. It predates any estate claim by 15 years. Ruth Callahan has the complete documentation if your attorneys would like to review it.
There may still be grounds to...
Before you finish that sentence, I'd like to show you something. Your names are on the tabs. Your father kept very thorough records. He never used what is in those folders. He felt it would be unethical. But he left everything to me, including the option to use it if I needed to protect myself. I have no interest in your inheritance. I have no interest in the Concord house, or the investment accounts, or any of the assets your father chose to leave you. What I have, this property, the trust fund, the documentation in this study, is mine completely and legally, and I will defend it as long and as expensively as necessary.
But I would much rather we simply never spoke of this again. You live your lives, I live mine. We have no reason to be in each other's way.
Daniel's attorneys called me the following Monday. They withdrew the inquiry. No challenge was ever filed. I've been practicing real estate law for 28 years, and I have seen estates contested for years, for decades, at enormous cost to everyone involved. Eleanor Voss resolved her situation in one afternoon with 2 folders and a pot of tea. I have never seen anything quite like it.
Eleanor Voss spent the winter at Heron Mill Road learning the house. Every room, every closet, every drawer of every cabinet. She read every document in the study, not because she needed to, but because she believed that understanding exactly what you have is the foundation of knowing how to protect it. She learned that Howard had, for the last decade of his life, been a quiet and significant benefactor to the town of Ashfield, funding the restoration of the public library, contributing anonymously to the local emergency services fund, endowing a scholarship at the regional high school in Eleanor's name. In Eleanor's name. A scholarship that had been awarded to 6 students over the past 4 years, while Eleanor had been living 40 miles east with no knowledge that her name was attached to anything beyond a household she did not own.
I received the Eleanor Voss Scholarship my junior year of high school. The letter said it was for students who demonstrated exceptional attention to detail and commitment to accuracy in their work. I didn't know who Eleanor Voss was. I looked her up and couldn't find anything. Now I know why. She didn't know she existed out here either. When I finally met her, when I finally got to tell her what that scholarship meant for my family, she didn't say anything for a really long time, and then she said, he always knew exactly what I was. I just didn't know he saw it.
In March, Eleanor made a decision about the conservation offer. She sold 60 acres of the eastern woodland to the conservation group, $2.1 million, which she used to establish a formal foundation. She kept the remaining 120 acres in the farmhouse. She hired a landscape firm to restore the formal gardens Howard had maintained incompletely. She hired a local contractor to update the kitchen and bathrooms while preserving every original architectural element. She called Patricia.
I don't know
believe you
yet
drove
what
out here
happy
alone and
means
said
exactly
nothing to
at
me.
this
I
point.
needed to see it without anyone
But I
else's
know what at
reaction in
peace
the room.
means.
That is the most Eleanor
And
Marsh
yes,
sentence. Howard always
for
said
the
I was the
first
only
time
person
in a
he knew
very
who'd be
long
completely
time,
alone in a crowd and completely
yes.
present when it mattered.
The
He
notebook
was
she
right.
kept
Are
during
you
those
happy
6
here?
months, 41 pages of dated, timed, specific observations, was never needed in court. Ruth Callahan kept a copy, sealed, in her office safe. Eleanor kept the original. 3rd drawer of the left filing cabinet in the Ashfield study, under the tab that reads simply, "What I Saw." Daniel and Christine Voss discovered, in the months that followed, that their father's estate was considerably more complicated than it had appeared at the will reading. The Concord house sold after 11 months on the market. The historic preservation requirements Howard had quietly established years earlier added 6 months to the process and hundreds of thousands to the carrying costs. The investment trusts had conditions neither of them had anticipated. They did not contact Eleanor. Eleanor did not contact them. She planted a garden in the spring. She restored the fountain in June. She had Patricia to stay for 2 weeks in July. She attended the annual award ceremony for the Eleanor Voss Scholarship in October, where she met, for the first time, all 6 of its recipients. She sat in the back of the Ashfield High School auditorium and listened to a 17-year-old girl talk about what it meant to be recognized for the quality of your attention, for the discipline of noticing, recording, and caring about accuracy. The girl said, "Whoever Eleanor Voss is, I hope she knows she changed my life." Eleanor sat in the back row and said nothing. She noted the date. She wrote it down. He gave her a rusty key and told her it meant nothing. She opened it anyway. And what she found inside was everything he had been saving for her since the very beginning. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the Whispered Tales, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. And tell us in the comments what part of Eleanor's journey stayed with you the most. Until next time, keep listening closely, because sometimes the quietest stories leave the deepest mark.